Ever wondered why some muscle cars become legends while others just become old cars? What if I told you that the 1970 Chevy Chevelle SS 454 has been hiding secrets that would make even the most die-hard gearheads do a double take? We're not talking about horsepower numbers or quarter-mile times here. We're counting down 20 shocking secrets about this American icon that'll completely change how you see this beast. So buckle up, because after this, you'll never look at a Chevelle the same way again. And hey, if you're into classic muscle cars, hit that like button and subscribe for more automotive revelations. Number 20. The mystery of the missing cars. Here's something that'll make your jaw drop. Chevrolet claims they built 12,827 SS 454 Chevelles in 1970. But here's where it gets weird. When researchers started digging through VIN numbers and production records in the 90s, they found evidence of at least 1,500 more cars that supposedly never existed. These ghost Chevelles had valid VINs. They had build sheets, they had everything except official recognition. Some collectors believe these were special order vehicles for GM executives and their friends. Others think they were prototype builds that got sold through back channels. The wildest theory? That Chevrolet deliberately underreported production numbers to make the car seem rarer than it actually was. And get this, several of these phantom cars have surfaced at auctions over the years with documentation that checks out perfectly. But officially, they don't exist. Number 19. The engine that wasn't supposed to exist. Everyone knows the LS6 was the king of Chevelle engines in 1970. 450 cubic inches of pure American muscle. But here's the secret. That engine was never supposed to make it into production. GM had a corporate ban on engines over 400 cubic inches in intermediate cars. The brass upstairs said it was too dangerous, too much liability, too much power for the average driver. But the Chevelle team had other plans. They built the engine anyway, tested it in secret, and when they finally showed it to management, they presented it as a limited production special that would only go to experienced drivers. The truth? They knew they'd sell every single one they could build. The corporate ban stayed in place officially, but somehow, 4,475 LS6 Chevelles rolled off the assembly line. Funny how that works. Number 18. The paint code conspiracy. Check this out. If you've ever looked at a 1970 Chevelle's paint code, you might have noticed something strange. Certain colors that definitely existed don't have official paint codes. Collectors have documented at least 7 different shades that appeared on SS 454s, but aren't in any GM color chart. The most famous is a deep purple that owners call Phantom Plum. It's darker than the official violet paint, but lighter than black. About 200 cars seem to have this color. GM says it doesn't exist, but walk through any major Chevelle show and you'll see them. The theory? These were custom mixes done at the factory for special orders. Some paint shop workers have come forward claiming they mixed these colors off the books for cash payments. GM denies all of it, but the cars are out there. Number 17. The racing ban that wasn't. In 1970, GM had an official no racing policy. They weren't supposed to support any racing activities or build race-specific parts. It was all about safety and corporate image. But if you knew the right people and said the right words, you could order your Chevelle with some very interesting options. Options that didn't appear in any brochure, like aluminum heads that just happened to flow 30% better than stock, or a camshaft that was way too aggressive for street driving, or a rear-end ratio that only made sense on a drag strip. These parts came in plain brown boxes. No part numbers, no documentation, just a wink and a nod from your dealer. Hundreds of these shadow racing packages were sold. Officially, they never existed. But Saturday night at drag strips across America, they were destroying the competition. Number 16. The Canadian connection. Here's something most American muscle car fans don't know. The Canadian-built 1970 Chevelles were different, really different. And not just in the obvious ways like metric speedometers. The Canadian cars got unique options you couldn't get stateside, like a heavy-duty cooling package that included an oil cooler as standard equipment, or the mysterious winter package that included a block heater, different gear ratios, and special cold weather lubricants. But the biggest secret? About 300 Canadian SS 454s got an experimental traction control system. It was primitive, basically just a limited slip differential with special clutches. But it worked. These cars could hook up on ice better than anything else GM made. The system was supposed to go into production for 1971. It never did. Those 300 cars remain the only Chevelles with factory traction control. Number 15. The Celebrity Files. You want to know a secret Hollywood doesn't want you to know? At least 40 major celebrities owned 1970 SS 454 Chevelles, but most of them hid it. Why? Because muscle cars weren't cool in Hollywood circles. They were considered low class, blue collar. Not the image stars wanted to project, but behind closed doors, they couldn't resist. Secret documents from a Beverly Hills Chevrolet dealer show orders from A-list actors using fake names. One Academy Award winner ordered 3 identical black SS 454s under his gardener's name. A famous singer had his delivered to a warehouse in Nevada so the press wouldn't see it. The best part? Many of these celebrity Chevelles had special modifications done at the dealer. Bulletproof glass, hidden compartments. One even had our early car phone system installed. These cars occasionally surface at auctions today, usually with no mention of their famous first owners. Number 14. The transmission nobody talks about. Everyone knows the Chevelle came with either a 4-speed manual or a turbo 400 automatic. That's what the books say. That's what GM says. But there's documented evidence of at least 50 cars that left the factory with something else entirely. A heavy-duty 3-speed automatic that was only supposed to be in trucks. The transmission code doesn't match anything in the official records. Owners who found these cars thought they had bogus documentation until they started comparing notes. All the cars have the same weird code, all have the same unusual shift pattern, and all seem to have been built in a 2-week period in April 1970. The theory? GM was testing a new transmission design and used the Chevelle as a real-world test bed. The test must have failed because the transmission never went into production. But those 50 cars are still out there, shifting differently than every other Chevelle on the road. Number 13. The assembly line sabotage. This one's dark. In late 1970, quality control inspectors at the Arlington, Texas assembly plant noticed something strange. About 1 in every 100 SS 454s had subtle defects that seemed intentional. Bolts that were barely finger tight, wiring harnesses with cuts in specific places, brake lines with tiny punctures. At first, they thought it was sloppy work. Then they realized it was sabotage. The investigation found that a group of workers who'd been passed over for promotions were deliberately damaging cars, but only specific cars, only SS 454s, and only ones going to certain regions. They were caught, but not before an estimated 200 cars left the plant with these hidden time bombs. GM quietly recalled what they could find, but many had already been sold. Some probably failed catastrophically. Others might still be out there, waiting to fail 50 years later. Number 12. The government cars. In 1970, the U.S. government ordered exactly 37 Chevelle SS 454s. Officially, they don't exist. No government procurement records, no GSA numbers, nothing. But the cars were built. They had special VINs that don't decode properly. They had blackout packages that weren't available to civilians. And they had some very interesting modifications, like switches under the dash that killed all the lights instantly, or reinforced bumpers that could ram through barriers, or engine modifications that pushed power well beyond factory specs. These weren't cop cars. Local police couldn't afford SS 454s. These were federal cars. Some people who claim to have worked on them say they were for high-speed pursuit training. Others say they were for transporting valuable assets quickly and discreetly. A few have surfaced in private collections, always with their special features removed or disabled. The owners usually have stories about buying them from government auctions that have no official records. Number 11. The dealer network secret. Want to hear something that'll blow your mind? In 1970, there was an underground network of Chevrolet dealers who were building super Chevelles that made the factory LS6 look tame. They called it the Brotherhood of Speed. About 20 dealers across the country were involved. They'd take delivery of SS 454s and immediately tear them down. Then they'd rebuild them with parts that weren't supposed to exist. We're talking about engines pushing 550 cubic inches, suspension components stolen from Corvette racing programs, brake systems from much heavier cars. These dealers would then sell these monsters to selected customers for huge markups. The cars came with no warranty and a verbal agreement to never mention where the modifications came from. GM knew about it but couldn't stop it without admitting they were secretly supporting the modifications. It's estimated that between 200 and 300 of these Super Chevelles were built. Finding one today is like finding buried treasure. Number 10. The color-changing paint experiment. This is going to sound like science fiction, but it's 100% true. In mid-1970, GM's Advanced Materials Division developed a paint that could change color based on temperature. Not just a subtle shift, we're talking about going from black to bright red as the car warmed up. They needed to test it in the real world, so they painted exactly 12 SS 454s with this experimental coating. The cars were distributed to GM engineers and their families with strict instructions to document how the paint held up. The experiment failed spectacularly. The paint would change colors at random. Sometimes it would stay half black, half red. Sometimes it would turn colors that weren't supposed to be possible. After 6 months, GM recalled all 12 cars to repaint them. But here's the thing, they only got 10 back. 2 are still out there somewhere, presumably repainted by now. But if you ever see a 70 Chevelle where the paint looks weird in old photos, you might be looking at one of the lost color changers. Number 9. The sound that shouldn't exist. Every gearhead knows what a big block Chevy sounds like. That distinctive rumble is unmistakable. But some 1970 SS 454s sound different, really different. And it's not the exhaust. In late 1969, GM engineers were experimenting with acoustic technology. They developed a resonator system that could change the engine's sound frequency, make it deeper, more intimidating. They installed it on about 100 pre-production Chevelles for testing. The system worked too well. Test drivers reported feeling physically uncomfortable at certain RPMs. The sound would penetrate your chest and make your heart skip beats. GM killed the program, but those 100 cars had already been mixed into regular production. They couldn't find them all to remove the systems. So somewhere out there are Chevelles that don't just sound mean, they sound wrong. Owners often think something's broken. Mechanics can never find the problem. Because the problem is a hidden resonator system that's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Number 8. The Executive Massacre. In October 1970, something happened at GM that's been covered up for 50 years. 15 high-level executives were fired on the same day. The official reason was restructuring. But insiders know the truth. These executives had been using their positions to build personal Chevelles with parts and options that were beyond special. We're talking about prototype engines that made 700 horsepower, suspension systems from the Corvette Grand Sport program, brake packages from Can-Am race cars. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. When GM's board found out about these Super Chevelles, they went nuclear. The executives were fired. Their cars were supposedly destroyed. But here's where it gets interesting. At least 5 of these executive specials have surfaced over the years. They're always sold quietly, always to collectors who promise to keep their mouths shut. The cars are so heavily modified they barely resemble stock Chevelles, but they're out there, representing what might have been if GM had really let their engineers run wild. Number 7. The insurance scandal. You think insurance fraud is a modern problem. In 1970, there was a massive conspiracy involving Chevelle SS 454s and insurance companies. Here's how it worked. Dealers would report cars as stolen before they were even delivered. The insurance companies would pay out. Then the cars would magically appear at dealerships in other states with new VINs. It was perfect. The cars were so new that nobody had proper documentation yet. VIN databases were primitive, and demand was so high that nobody asked questions when an extra SS showed up. The scheme fell apart when one car got stolen 3 times. Insurance investigators started comparing notes and uncovered a network involving at least 50 dealers across 12 states. The scandal was hushed up to prevent a massive industry black eye, but it means there are probably hundreds of 1970 Chevelles out there with questionable histories. Cars that officially don't exist but are sitting in someone's garage right now. Number 6. The space program connection. This one's so weird it's hard to believe. But in 1970, NASA bought 7 Chevelle SS 454s. Not for the astronauts to drive, for testing. They were developing new materials for the space shuttle program and needed test beds for high-stress experiments. These Chevelles were fitted with experimental ceramic brake rotors, carbon fiber body panels that wouldn't be seen on production cars for decades, even a titanium exhaust system that cost more than the car itself. The cars were thrashed mercilessly at NASA facilities, driven at sustained high speeds for hours, subjected to temperature extremes, used to test materials that would eventually go into space. When the testing was done, the cars were supposed to be destroyed. But NASA, being NASA, they just parked them in a warehouse and forgot about them. In the early 2000s, they were quietly sold at a government auction. The buyers had no idea what they were getting. These rolling pieces of space program history are now in private hands, probably restored to stock condition with no trace of their cosmic past. Number 5. The mob cars. In 1970, organized crime had a problem. They needed fast cars that could blend in, not flashy Cadillacs or Lincolns that screamed mob boss. They needed something that looked normal but could outrun anything on the road. Enter the Chevelle SS 454. Through corrupt dealers in New York, Detroit, and Chicago, the mob ordered dozens of specially modified Chevelles. These weren't just fast cars. They had hidden compartments welded into the frame rails, switches that would disable the brake lights for night runs. Some even had early nitrous systems for emergency speed bursts. The FBI knew about these cars but could never prove anything. The modifications were too well hidden. The paper trails were too clean. It wasn't until years later, when mob figures started flipping, that the full story came out. These cars were used for everything from money runs to hit getaways. Today, some of these mob Chevelles are in museums. Others are owned by collectors who have no idea about their dark history. But if you know what to look for, specific welding patterns, unusual switch placements, you can still identify them. Number 4. The recall that never happened. In December 1970, GM discovered a catastrophic flaw in about 800 SS 454s. The frame rails on cars built during a specific 2-week period had defective welds. Under hard acceleration, the frames could literally crack in half. GM prepared a massive recall. Letters were drafted, dealers were notified. Then, nothing. The recall never happened. Why? Because GM calculated it would be cheaper to quietly settle lawsuits than admit to the defect. They figured most cars would never see the kind of stress that would cause failure. They were mostly right, but not entirely. Over the years, dozens of Chevelles have suffered catastrophic frame failures. The owners usually blame aftermarket modifications or age. They don't know their car was doomed from the factory. GM still denies the defect existed. But internal documents that leaked in the 90s tell a different story. Those 800 cars are still out there. Most have probably been reinforced during restorations. But some are ticking time bombs, waiting for one hard launch to split in half. Number 3. The time capsule cars. Here's something that sounds like an urban legend, but is absolutely true. In 1970, a GM executive ordered 25 identical SS 454s. Not to drive, not to sell, to bury. He was convinced that muscle cars would be banned soon and wanted to preserve them for the future. These cars were prepared with special rust-proofing, filled with nitrogen instead of air in the tires, and sealed in waterproof containers. Then they were buried in locations across the Midwest. The executive died in 1985, taking the locations to his grave. But he left clues, cryptic notes in safety deposit boxes, strange markings on old maps. To date, 7 of these time capsule Chevelles have been found. Each one emerged from the ground in perfect condition. 0 miles on the odometer, still smelling like a new car. The finders have sold them for astronomical prices to collectors who appreciate owning a literal piece of preserved history. But that means 18 more are still out there, waiting underground. Modern treasure hunters use everything from ground-penetrating radar to old aerial photos trying to find them. It's the ultimate barn find, except the barn is 6 feet under. Number 2. The engine that predicted the future. In April 1970, GM engineers built 5 experimental engines that were decades ahead of their time. These weren't just big blocks with fancy parts. These were glimpses into the future. Variable valve timing, direct injection, even primitive computer controls. They put these engines in SS-454 test mules to see if the technology could survive real-world abuse. The engines made incredible power. Some dyno sheets showed over 600 horsepower. But more importantly, they got better fuel economy than the standard 454. The technology was too expensive and complex for 1970. But GM learned from these experiments. Features from these engines would appear in production cars 20 years later. The test cars were supposed to be destroyed after the program ended, but at least 2 survived. They're in private collections now, their owners probably unaware they're driving around with engines that predicted technologies like VTEC and direct injection by decades. These Chevelles aren't just muscle cars, they're rolling prophecies of automotive future. Number 1. The Chevelle that killed muscle cars. Here it is, the biggest secret, the one that changes everything. In late 1970, GM built one very special Chevelle SS 454. It had every performance option, every secret upgrade, every experimental part they could throw at it. This was going to be the ultimate muscle car. The press release was written, the marketing campaign was planned. This car was going to show the world that GM could build something that made everything else look slow. Then they tested it. The car was terrifyingly fast, 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Quarter-mile times that wouldn't be matched for decades. Top speed that was genuinely dangerous. But more importantly, it was uncontrollable. Professional test drivers crashed it twice. The car was so powerful, so brutal, that it was genuinely unsafe. GM executives realized they'd gone too far. If this car got into public hands, people would die. Lawsuits would destroy the company. So, they made a decision. Not only would this Ultra Chevelle never see production, but the entire muscle car program would be wound down. The insurance companies were already circling. The government was making noise about safety. This car was the excuse they needed to kill the muscle car era. The Ultra Chevelle was supposedly destroyed, but rumors persist that it's hidden in a GM warehouse somewhere, waiting. The car so powerful it killed an entire genre of automobiles. The ultimate Chevelle that was too ultimate for its own good. And there you have it. 20 secrets about the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 that'll make you see this legend in a whole new light. From ghost cars to mob runners, from space-age technology to buried treasure, this isn't just a muscle car. It's a rolling mystery wrapped in American steel. Which secret shocked you the most? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you want more automotive secrets and forgotten history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, we're just getting started on uncovering the truth about America's most iconic cars. Until next time, keep those big blocks rumbling and those secrets coming.